All right. Uh, so let's start the last lecture or so in in MCL 361. And what we are going to do in today's lecture is an intro to dynamic programming. Okay. Now, the good thing about dynamic programming is I can teach the basic ideas of dynamic programming without actually needing to give you a lot of background, right? So for example, for MCL 261 and nonlinear optimization, there's a lot of background that I have to cover before I start teaching you algorithms, right? So for example, like convexity and convergence and all those things actually, right? uh, Before I can actually start with Newton's method, Newton's method of optimization, we will derive the optimality conditions, and then we can actually go towards the um, actual algorithm itself, right? In this case, it's not the basic idea of dynamic programming can actually be conveyed without, I think, too much additional background. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to teach you the basic ideas. We're going to solve an example problem, and one of the things I'll try to do is I'll try to give you some basic ideas that you need to understand to be able to recognize when a problem can be formulated as a dynamic programming problem, right? Now the question is actually, why am I teaching you dynamic programming in MCL 361? Because one example is because you've already seen an example of dynamic programming in MCL 361 already, right? You saw Wagner-Witten when we did inventory control. The other reason is because dynamic programming is one of those techniques that can be applied to a wide variety of problems. It can be applied to deterministic problems. It can be applied to probabilistic problems. The, and they are used very often in a wide variety of decision-making problems in a wide variety of decision-making situations in sort of manufacturing and industrial engineering, right? So one classic example is in for example in project management, right? So where you have defined a set of stages for a project, and at each stage you need to make some sort of a decision about where to go to, and dynamic programming actually does very well for those sorts of problems, right? Another example, as you saw very well, it was in the case of inventory control itself, right? So where you have to decide whether to produce or not after every time period, right? So it lends itself well, the technique of dynamic programming, to a wide variety of situations in industrial engineering, in manufacturing, and in general in operations management. Okay, all right. So I'm going to start off by basically telling you where it is used. So dynamic programming is used when you want to make a sequence of decisions. Okay, so dynamic programming is used when you want to make a sequence of decisions, and these decisions are typically interrelated in some way, right? Okay, so for example, in the case of inventory control, in the case of Wagner-Witten, you want to make a decision about how to satisfy demand over a period of time, right? And how much you produce in 1 week, it sort of affects how much you can produce in the next week and so on. Or they, more than that, I think the basic, more broadly, when we say interrelated, what we mean is it relates to there is an under that, you're not making completely different problems about completely different things. So essentially, when you're talking about Wagner-Witten, for example, you're making a decision for a given planning horizon. You've been given the demand and for a single product, and then you have to make decisions about how to meet that demand, right? So the idea is there should be some sort of a common theme running through the problem that you're trying to solve. So in project management, for example, you're managing a project, right? So all the decisions you make are going to sort of affect each other. All right. Okay. So again, when we teach dynamic programming, the other thing to mention here is that I can't give you sort of a specific formulation for dynamic programming. So I can't tell you, for example, when you solve a nonlinear problem, I can in general say that you want to minimize, for example, some f of x right? So let's say that x is in Rn, subject to maybe some g of x greater than or equal to 0, or subject to some h of x equal to 0, right? So you have a set of linear equality constraints, set of uh, inequality constraints, and these functions can be linear, at least one of them has to be nonlinear for it to be a nonlinear optimization problem. But otherwise, in general, uh, so this is the sort of structure that I can give you, right? So you have an inequality constraint, you have an equality constraint, and then you have f of x, and I can say that okay, f of x is an Rn, for example, right? So I can define the structure for the problem. Now you can define sort of, now in dynamic programming I can't give you say a formulation like this and say, for example, you need to have inequality constraints, equality constraints. That is not going to happen, or you need to have a particular type of objective function. But I'll give you a overall, you'll get a more broad formulation without actually without getting a sort of a formulation for the problem as a whole. So I'll explain when I actually give you an example, and I sort of give you the general formulation for that example, or at least some basic relation, a function that a formulation that describes the problem at a given stage, for example. You'll see what I mean. Okay. So the key thing to note is that for dynamic programming, uh, only a broad formulation exists. That said, a problem needs to have some specific properties in order to be able to formulate it as a dynamic programming problem. Okay, so problem needs to have specific properties, which we will discuss after I've shown you the example and sort of illustrated the dynamic programming approach, in order to be formulated as a dynamic programming problem. Okay. Now, why is it called dynamic programming? It's because you make these decisions in at discrete time intervals, or sometimes actually at different stages. Um, so essentially, you have to keep making decisions. So there is not a single. So when you have in nonlinear optimization, for example, once you have a specific procedure, right? So for example, if let's say that you use steepest descent with some sort of a line search, let's say for example the backtracking line search, then that's what you're going to do throughout, right? So you can sort of close your eyes and let the algorithm run, and it'll give you the uh, optimal solution. In the case of dynamic programming, actually what you don't get is a single optimal solution. What you get is an optimal policy, which means that you can that your decisions can change actually depending upon where you are, uh, and you don't always, for example, use xk plus 1 is equal to xk plus alpha k pk, right? So the idea is what you get is actually a framework for making decisions at every step, instead of saying that okay, do 1 2 3 4. So instead, what dynamic programming will tell you is, if you're here, do this, if you're here, do this, and so on. So you get a policy and not a optimal solution. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why it's called dynamic programming, because things change depending upon where you are and at what stage you are, for example. Okay. All right, so I've told you enough about in sort of non-specific terms of about what dynamic programming is. So it's just an approach used to make a sequence of decisions, okay, interrelated decisions. Now, let's actually describe a problem. Okay, so let's say that you have to undertake some sort of a journey, okay, and you have to go essentially from your destination A to some destination, let's say J. I'm using the example straight from the textbook, by the way, and I'll tell you what the name of the textbook is, what chapter number it is, and so on at the end of this lecture. Okay, so let's say you have to go from A to J, and this journey needs to be made in a certain number of stages. Okay, so for example, you go from you have to go from, in the first stage you make one decision, the second stage you make another decision about what to do. You have a certain number of options at each stage, and you have to pick one. Essentially, you have to make a decision about which option to pick, and finally you have to get from stage A to stage J. Okay, and the question is, how do you get there? What is the best way to get from A to J? So let's say, for example, from A to in the first stage you actually have to pick one of three options. Okay, so you start in stage A, and then in the first stage you actually have to make a decision about whether to pick B, C or D. Similarly, in the second stage, let's say that you again have to make three decisions. You have to make one decision about, but you have three options. Okay, and let's say this is the first stage, the second stage, and then in the third stage, let's say as you're getting closer to your destination, the number of decisions becomes fewer, and that's not always the case. It's a characteristic of this specific problem. There's no reason why you can't have, for example, 4 possible options here. Okay, so in the third stage you have to make 2 decisions, and in the final stage, that is there's only one decision, there's only one option, so you just have to pick J, right? So in the first stage there are 3 possible decisions, and in the second stage you have 3 possible decisions again. Depending upon wherever you are, you have 3 possible decisions. So from B you can pick E, F, G, from C you can pick E, F, G, from D you can pick E, F, G. So it gets a little messy, but you get the idea, right? And from E, again you have 2 decisions here, similarly, and from H again you have a single decision, right? So now the question is, how do I get in an optimal way from A to J, right? So what does this mean? What does optimal mean in this sense? For this particular problem, let's assume that you have to go from A to J using the shortest path. But then, a question to ask here is, I've not attached any distances to these paths, right? So how do I define shortest? So typically there is going to be, for example, a cost associated from going to of making each decision. So if I want to go from A to B, there is going to be a cost CAB. If I want to go from A to C, there is going to be a cost CAC. If I want to go from A to D, there is going to be a cost CAD, and so on, right? So this will be, for example, CHJ, this will be CIJ, right? So this will be ECEH, this will be, for example, CEI, and so on, right? So at each stage, for each decision that you can, for each option, there is going to be a cost associated with that option. So the idea is, how do I get from A to J while incurring the least cost? Okay, so here we want to minimize the cost of going from A to J. So let's actually write down some costs for this. Okay, so let's just write down the cost structure. So in the first stage, I am at A, and there are 3 possible costs for me, right? So I can go from B, C, and D. So I'm going to write down the costs 2, 4, and 3, right? Okay, and let's say that in the second stage, how many costs am I going to have? I'm going to have 9, right? So B, C, D, I'm going to have E, F, G, so this is going to be 7, 4, 6, 3, 2, 4, 4, 1, 5. Alright, and finally, in the third stage, I am going to have 6 decisions, so 6 possible costs. So 6 options. So from E to H to I, so I'm going to have 1, 4, 6, 3, and 3, 3, right? And then finally, from H and I, if I want to go to J, it's a vector, so I get these costs here. So this is 3. So this actually gives me the specification of the problem. Okay, so there are essentially 4 stages. In the first stage, I have to make a decision here about which option to pick. In the second stage, I have to make another decision. Third stage, another decision, and finally, in the fourth stage, of course, there is no decision. There's only one option, so you just have to sort of pick that option, right? So now, what I need to do, and I've also given the costs of picking each option at each stage, right? Depending upon which state I am in uh, at each stage. Okay. So there are 3 words that you would have seen me use so far. The first is going to be stage, right? So a problem needs to be able to be defined, or it needs to be able to broken down into stages for it to be able to be formulated as a dynamic programming problem. Okay, you need to be able to clearly demarcate what are the stages. You need to be able to define what are the possible states you can be in at each stage. Okay, so at each stage you can find yourself in one of many states, whether it is finite or infinite. We are only going to be dealing with the finite case, okay, in these lectures. So you have uh, so you need to be able to break your problem down into stages. So in the case of Wagner-Witten, we were able to decide in the case of Wagner-Witten, we were able to break our problem down into weeks, right? So the question was, okay, in this week, do I need to produce or not? If so, how much do I produce, and so on, right? And so there, in some sense, the state was in some sense infinite, actually, right? So, and the number of options also infinite, because you could actually produce any number, right? And in and the other thing is, you have a policy. Okay, policy will come to later, but for now, just keep in mind that essentially there are roughly three things actually. You need to be able to break your problem down into stages, and at each stage you need to be able to define what are the possible states that one can be in. Okay, now how am I going to solve the problem? What did we do in Wagner-Witten? In Wagner-Witten, we started at the first stage. We picked the obvious decision here, and from there we uh, we then moved to the second stage. Right, in the first week, you have to produce whatever is needed to satisfy the demand in the first week. Right, in the second week, um, now, one thing I want to mention is, actually in Wagner-Witten, it's not correct that actually there are an infinite number of states, because remember the Wagner-Witten property, right? In the Wagner-Witten property, you could only produce an integer number of uh, uh, future periods demands, right? So it was a discrete problem, but anyway, but you get the idea, right? So at each possible stage in week, you could actually, the number of options available to you was finite in that case, but it's not necessary that it always has to be finite. Okay, in this case, we're just going to deal with the discrete problem with the finite case, so we don't need to worry ourselves about the infinite case. Right, so what did we do? How did we solve it in the Wagner-Witten problem? Now, in the Wagner-Witten problem, what we did was, we started with the first week. We figured out what was the optimal decision there, and um, and then we moved on to the second week. Right, second week also, it was an easy. There we defined 2 problems. Right, either you produce in week one, either you produce week two's demand in week one, or you produce in week one and week two. Right, so you had 2 options. We solved it. Again, a relatively simple case. Then when we moved on to the third week, what did we do? We actually used the optimal solution from the 2-week problem in solving the 3-week problem, right? So we knew that what are the possible options. You produce in week 1, you produce in week 2, you produce in week 3. So the question was, when do you produce week 3's demand? You either produce in week 1, or you produce it in week 2, or you produce it in week 3, right? And ideally, normally we would have ended up with 4 options, but we actually ended up with only 3, because we used the fact that if you are producing in week 1 and week 2, then the notion of actually producing again in week 3 sort of does not make sense, right? Because we knew that for the 2-week problem, it was optimal to produce only in week 1, right? So we did not have to consider the option of producing in week 1, week 2 and in week 3, because we knew that once you're producing in week 3 and in week 2, there was no question of actually you know, it didn't make sense, right? Because the 2 week problem, for the 2 week problem, you're only it was optimal to produce only in week 1. So solving in week 1, week 2 and week 3, producing in week 1, week 2 and week 3 reduces to solving in week 1 and week 3, for example, right? uh, Anyway, let's not worry too much about that. But the basic idea is this. The basic idea is we started with a small problem, we solved it, we then enlarged it by one stage, we moved on to the next stage, we solved that problem, and then when we moved on to the next stage, we used the optimal solutions from the previous stages in solving the current problem, right? So the idea was, we started with a stage, we increased the size of the problem by one stage, we used the optimal solution from the previous stage, and then we increased the size of the problem by one stage until we got to the until we exhausted all the stages. So the idea is, you solve it stage, you increase the size of the problem by one stage at each step, and you use the optimal solution of the previous stage problem in solving your current problem, right? Okay, so let's write that down. Now let's actually write down that sort of formulation. So before I solve this, I'm going to write that formulation down. Okay. So what is that formulation? That formulation is basically, let's say that I am in stage n. So I am in the nth stage. Let's say that I am in state S, in the nth stage. I am in the nth stage, I am in state S, and I have selected my decision, my option as Xn. Okay, so let's say that you're in the nth stage, and the option that I have selected in state S is Xn. Okay, so let's, for example, relate it to our problem here. So this is the first stage, you're in the first stage, you're in the second stage, you're in the third stage, and you're in the fourth stage. Fifth stage also, of course, is there, but this is sort of trivial, right? So you're sort of at the destination here. Now, at each stage, you have to actually pick so let's say that there are n stages here. So in this case, there are n stages, of course, as in the other case. So you have n stages, and in this case, n is equal to, let's say, 5. So when you're in the first stage, so at each stage, you have to make a decision, right? Now, I am going to denote my decision variables as Xn, depending upon the stage that I am in. So if I'm in stage n, if I'm in stage 1, okay, my decision variables can be basically B, C and D. So I have a finite solution space, right, at stage 1, at every stage actually in this case. And in X2, I have basically E, F and G and so on, right? So in stage 3 I have H and I, and in stage 3 I have H and I, in stage 4 I have J, and stage 5 is sort of trivial. There is no, it's sort of an empty set. You've sort of reached your destination, right? So let's just write that down anyway. X3 is H and I, X4 is just J, and X5 we can just say is null set. So I'm mostly just going to consider the first 4 stages. I'm not really going to consider the 5th stage, right? So because doesn't have much meaning in this case. So in the given that you've seen that, so in the nth stage, let's say you're in state S. Okay, for example, let's say you're in the second stage, you're in where S is equal to B, right? And you have a decision variable Xn, which can take on a finite set of values. In our case, let's assume it's finite for now. And Yeah, so this we know. So now I can define, for example, Fn of Sxn. Okay. Now the question is, what is this Fn of Sxn? So this is the total cost of the best overall policy for the remaining stages given. So essentially from the n plus 1 stage, given you are in state S in the nth stage and you have picked Xn as the option. Okay, so this is not a sort of a trivial thing, just keep in mind. So I'm just going to explain it again. So what is Fn? Fn is the total cost of the best, in other words the optimal overall policy for the remaining stages from the n plus 1 stage onwards, given that you are in state S in the nth stage and you've picked Xn as the option. So what this means is, let's say I'm in stage 2 and I'm in state B. Okay, so F2B, and let's say I've already picked E as my destination, as my option. So F2BE represents the total cost of the best way to get from B to from E to it's a total cost of getting from B to J, given that you know that you're going to go to E next. Okay, let me repeat that. What does F2BE mean? It means the total cost of getting from B to J, given that you know you're going to go to E. So you've already made your decision, your immediate decision has been made. Okay, so it's the total cost of getting from B to J in the shortest possible way, given that you already made the decision that you're going to go from B to E. Okay, so let's write that down again. Let me just clarify that. So Fn x S of Xn consists of two components then, right? So the first component is the cost of going from Cs to Xn, because you made that decision that you're going to go to Xn, plus it consists of the best overall policy of the remaining stages, which is Fn plus 1 star. Remember, it's the best, so it's the optimal policy, given that you are going to given that you're going to Xn. So the idea is, once you're in Xn, you are going to take the best possible way to get to your final destination. Okay, so that's what this is. So given that you're in Xn, you're going to take the best possible destination plus the cost of getting to Xn from S. Okay, so there are two components here. So you can see that this is actually a recursive relationship, and this is exactly what we did in Wagner-Witten as well. Okay, so but this is a more generalized form of what we applied in Wagner-Witten was sort of a dynamic programming approach. But don't think too much about Wagner-Witten, I would say. Actually, I'm just giving you some examples just because you've seen it before. But overall, the idea is that this basic relationship you need to be able to define for a dynamic programming problem. Okay, I'll give you a slightly more general version later, but for now, in the context of our specific problem, so Fn Sxn is the cost of making your immediate is the cost of going from S to Xn, and then on top of that, the optimal cost of getting from Xn to your final destination. Okay, so your Fn star is essentially your F star n plus 1 xn essentially represents the optimal cost of getting from xn to the destination. So what dynamic programming does is it starts out just like Wagner-Witten. It starts out with the simplest possible problem, simplest possible sub-problem. It starts out with the simplest possible sub-problem here. And what is that? It is basically, let's think about it, right? So the simplest possible sub-problem in this case is actually the last one here, right? Because here you need to make 3 decisions, but here you start out instead by decisions, and then you have to make a bunch of decisions. So because it's not so easy to figure out, if you're here, what is the optimal way of getting from B to J, right? Whereas if you're here, there is only one decision to make, right? So your F4 star is easy to find out. So for example, if you're let's say you want to define F4 of let's say F4 HJ, right? So your F4 HJ is just the cost of going from here to here. So this is essentially equal to F4 star of H, right? So there is no optimal decision here. So you start off with the simplest one here. Okay. So what dynamic programming does is it starts off with the simplest possible subproblem, it solves it, then moves on to a slightly more complicated subproblem, uses the optimal solution from the from the simpler subproblem that it solved in going forward. Okay. So let's say that, so you write, so what it does is essentially it sets your n equal to essentially the last stage where you actually have to make a decision. In this case it's stage 4, and then it solves that simple problem and then uses it to solve Fn xn. So here the thing to remember is, this is, I'm defining Fn of Sxn, right? But what I actually want to do, the problem that I want to solve is I want to minimize, find xn such that you minimize Fn Sxn. Okay, and ideally in our particular problem, what we want to solve is actually minimize x1 given you want to solve F1 A J. This is actually what we want to solve. This is the problem that is overall problem that we want to solve. And what we are going to do is, instead of sort of enumerating the problem, what we are actually going to solve is we are going to use the fact that F1 A this is actually x1. Okay. Because remember, at A your decision variable is defined as x1, which is equal to B, B, C and D, which can take on values. So this is going to be, this is what we want to solve for the entire problem. It's going to use the fact that F1A xn1 x1 is going to be equal to the cost of A x1 plus F star 2 of x1. Now it's going to use the recursion here as well. So F2 star x1 is going to be equal to minimize over x2 f of x2 x3, right? No, hold on. Now when you're in x1, when you're in the second stage and you have your decision variable x2, when you're in the second stage and you have a decision variable x2, you can actually find an x2 star that minimizes essentially arg min over x2 f2 star. You're in let's say you're in, for example, x1 and your decision variables are x2. Okay, so this is the so this, and your x2 star is actually going to yield a f2 star x2, right? So if I put x2 star in here, it's essentially going to give me f star to x1. Sorry, yeah, this is, so this can be a bit confusing. When I solve the example problem, you will actually understand it. So x2 star is actually going to give me f2 star of x1. Okay, so I'm just going to rub this off. So what is this? And this I'm going to put in here. Similarly, I can write x3, x4 and so on. So what dynamic programming does, it starts at the last. So it actually finds out, for example, f4 star of let's say you're in x3. Okay, this it uses in finding f3 star of x2. This it uses in finding f2 star of x1, and in turn this it uses in finding f1 star of x0 in our case, which is, that is basically a. Okay, so this is the, and this is how, which is what we want to find. So it starts with the simplest problem, solve the slightly larger problem, again slightly larger problem, and then reaches to the optimal solution in the end. Which is, if you remember, as with Wagner-Witten, that is exactly what we did. I'm going to stop talking in generalities now, and let's solve the actual problem. It will give you a much better understanding of what is happening. Okay, then I'll revisit this, and I'll revisit this, and things will become sort of clearer what I just discussed here. Okay. Alright, so let's solve the problem here. So first you will start off with the last stage, right? Now with the last stage, let's say you're in H. Keep in mind that what I'm going to solve in the last stage is, I said I'm going to solve f4 star of x3. Now what did I define x3 as? I defined x3 as h and I, right? So where x3 is h and I, which means I need to find f4 star of h, and I need to find f4 star of I. Okay, so let's find out. So that's fairly straightforward. We know the costs as well, so let's actually just write that down. So h from I, it's j, right? So what were the costs? Let's go back. It was 3 and 4. So in this case there is only one decision, so your f4 star of h is basically just 3, f4 star of I is basically 4, right? So let's write down a simple table that summarizes all of this. Okay, so let's say that you're in S, you can be in H or in I, and let's just write this down. Okay, and here we will write our xn. Okay, so here we will write our xn. There's only one. Okay, and what we will write here is we will actually write down f of s xn. Okay, so in this case it is basically f of s xn is just going to be 3 and 4. Now what did we define f of s xn as? We define f of s xn as cs xn plus fn plus 1 star of xn, right? In this case all we have is csxn, which is basically, so let me write down f of, just to make things a bit clearer, I am going to write down f of, you're in h, you have to go to j, right? So that is just chj plus, you're not going anywhere from j, so this is just 0, right? So chj is just 3, so that's why f of sxn of j is just 3 here. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. Now if you had more options, what I would write here is also the xn star. Okay, so which is the, what is the optimal path to take? In this case, if you're in h, you just have to go to j, so there is no, what is the destination here? This is just j, this is just j, right? All right, okay, so we know what are f4 star of h, we know f4 star of I. Now let's actually come to, let's say that you were in the third stage. Now we are going to come to the third stage problem. Let's actually define it in the next page. This is a bit messy right now. Okay, third stage problem. So we solved the simplest subproblem. Now we are actually increasing the size of our subproblem by one stage. Okay, what do we want to find out here? We need to find out f3 star of, what is it, x2, right? So here we found f4 star of x3, here we need to find f3 star of x2. x2 we defined as, what did we define as, e f g, right? So we need to find f3 star of f, we need to find f3 star of g, we need to find f3 star of e, sorry, yeah, okay, and we're going to do the similar calculation. Now what we're going to do is, first let's actually just define our possible s's and our possible xn's. So if you're in the third stage, now let's go back to the problem. If you're in the third stage, which is here, you're in the third stage, you can be in one of three possible states, and the idea is from here you need to actually make some decisions, right? So your possible decisions are h and I, and your possible decisions are h and I, and your possible states are e, f and g. So let's just take remember the costs as well. So it's 1 4 6 3 3 3, so 1 4 6 3 and 3 3. Okay, so I'm just going to write that down. So let's just write that down for reference here. So E, F, G, H and I. Okay, let's just write it down. It's 1 4 6 3 3 and 3. Now so S is possibly E, F and G. Okay, so hold on. Now here we will write down H and I. Okay, now remember what we are going to write down here. We are actually going to write down f of s xn, right? So in this case your xn is h, so here what we're actually going to write is f of s h, and here we are going to write um, f of s I. Okay, and here we are going to write our xn star. Now from E, let's actually write this down. What is f of E h? F of E h is the cost of going from E to h plus f star of, you're in the fourth stage, going from h, right? Now f4 star of h we know, C of E h we also we know. C of E h is just 1 plus 3, right? F4 star of h we know. So 1 plus 3, it is of course 4. Okay, now what is, we also want to write E f of ei, which is just C ei plus f4 star of I, right? So in this case it's 4 plus 4, which is 8. Now what is the optimal xn star for, what is the optimal xn star for the problem? So let's say you're in E. One of the things we want to find out is f3 star of E, right? In other words, we need to find the xn star that minimizes f3 of, so we need to find the xn star that minimizes f of E xn. Okay, now we know the two possible values that f of E xn can take. It's either 4 or 8. So obviously the optimal xn star in this case is h, right? And we can also write down, and the fn star of course is just going to be, if we write down f of E xn star, that's just going to be 4. So we can write down that column also if required. All right. Now similarly, we're going to do these calculations a bit faster from now on. So now that you know, so here what we want to write is f of f h, right? So that we know, which is basically f of f to h is 6 plus, you know, what is the cost of going from h to j, that is 9. So 6 plus 3 is 9. Here the cost of going from f to I is 3. 3 plus 4 in this case is 7, right? And what is your optimal xn star in this case? It's actually quite straightforward, and this is just 7. Finally, if you're in G, the cost of going from G to H is 3. So 3 plus, you know, the cost of going from H to J, it is 3. So here you're going to get 6. The cost of going from G to I is 3. And I to j is 4, so you know that this is 7. In this case it's also h, and you have f star g xn. So this is actually, sorry, this should be f star s xn. This should just be 6, right? Okay, now we've solved the third stage problem. I hope you're getting a hang of how we're going to do the next. Now we're going to solve now the second stage problem. Okay, now so let's take a look at the second stage problem. Now in the second stage problem, you are in the second stage, so you're going to write down f2, and what you want to solve is basically f2 of, let's actually write this f star. What you want to find is f star 2 of x1. Now what is x1? X1 was basically b, c and d, right? So we have to find f2 star of b, f2 star of c, and of course f2 star of d. All right, so let's just write down our table again once again. So I'm just going to write down actually what are the possible options in the second stage. Earlier we had only two options, now we have three options, right? So you have B, C, D, and E, F, and G, right? So let's just write down the cost matrix quickly. Sorry, okay, so let's just oh sorry, oh okay, yeah. So I'm just going to, so we need this, this is what we require. This is going to be 7, 4, 6, 3, 2, 4, 4, 1, 5. Okay. Now, so let's write down our sort of calculation matrix, which is basically going to be S and Xn, right? So S in this case is going to be B, C, and D. Here it's going to be E, F, and G. Now keep in mind, what do we write here? Here we write F of, you're in S, B, E. That's what we're going to write down here, right? And here we're going to write down F of B. So we're going to write F of S, E is what we're going to write down in this column. Okay. So let's just write that down. So we are going to write F of S, E. Here we are going to write F of S, F, F of S, G. Here we are going to write down our Xn star, and here we can write down our F star. If you're in, what is this, right? So if you're in B, what is the optimal way? F star of B is what we are going to write down, right? Okay, so just remember that's what we did here. So this is sorry, this will be just F star of S. Sorry, I'm just getting my notation mixed up a little bit. F S F N, sorry, S. This is what we're going to write down here, where our S is B, C, and D, and we are in the second stage. So this will be 2, right? So we will write down X2 star, and here we will write down F2 star of S. Alright, so let's write this down quickly. Now, I'm just going to do the first calculation. I'm going to write that down in detail, and then the rest we're just going to fill it up as we go along, right? So let's write down the first one. So the first one to write down is FBE. What is that equal to? That is cost of going from B to E plus, what is that? It is basically the cost, the optimal cost of the remaining stages. So now that you are in E, in the third stage, keep in mind you are solving the second stage problem. So this is going to be n plus 1 E, right? So that's what we found here, right? So F3 star of E, remember that's what we found, and that's what we have here, for example, right? So Fs Xn star for E, that is 4. So in this case, that is equal to, what is the cost of going from B to E? Let me just, 7 plus F3 star of E, we know the value from here, which is basically 4, right? Plus 4, of course this is 11. So that's what we write down here. Similarly, what is F3 star, what is F of BF? Now f of bf, I'm just going to write down one more calculation, which is just cbf plus f3 star of f, which we know from here is 7. So as you can see, we are using the optimal solution from our previous stage, right? So in this case, CBF is just 4 plus 7 also equal to 11. So that's going to be interesting, right? And let's just write down BG. That's going to be 6 plus, I think it was 6, I think, right? G was 6, yeah. So this is going to be 12. So what is your x2 star? In this case, it's basically E or F is your optimal option, and the optimal cost is basically 11, right? Okay, so let's just wrap this up quickly. Now let's do the calculations quickly for C. Now from C to E we know it is actually 3, and from E to F3 star of E we know is 4, so this is going to be 7. C to F is going to be 2, right? Plus we know what do we know, the we know F3 star of F is basically 7, so 2 plus 7 is going to be 9. C to G is 4, 4 plus 6 is going to be 10, right? F3 star of G is 10 is 6, sorry, so 4 plus 6 is 10. D to E is 4, 4 plus 4 we know is 8. D to F is 1, 1 plus 7 is also going to be 8. D to G is going to be 5, 5 plus 6 is going to be 11. Sorry, in this case it's quite clear, it's actually E, and the cost is 7. In this case it's actually quite clear, your x2 star is going to be E or F again, and your cost is going to be 8, right? Okay, so let's solve the final problem. Now we are at the final stage, the first stage, right? So we are actually going to, we want to find f1 star of A, or we are in the first stage problem. Okay, now what does this mean? We want to just, in what we want to find is f1 star of, in some sense, x naught, right? And our x naught is basically B, C and D. So yeah, so I think I just missed the I think notation. I think here I've defined my yeah, so x1 yeah, so I just need to, I think, increment my notations here. I'm just going to do that. Okay, so it's fn xn, so let's not worry too much about that, though. I hope you get the basic idea, right? So I just mixed up the notation here slightly. This is what happens when I think I don't have students in the class to correct me, right? Anyway, so we know what the we know the basic idea. So here what we have to find, for the possible states you're going to be in the first stage is just 1, right? So let's just write down our cost matrix. So B, C and D, right? That is just 2, 4 and 3. Let's write down S, X, N. Once again, you have just A, and you have B, C and D. Okay, and here we are just going to write down xn star, and we are going to write down here f star n of S, right? Okay, so here remember what we are going to write is FAB. For example, here we are going to write FAC, and here we are going to write FAD. Okay, let's write down, do the first calculation. What is FAB? FAB is the cost of going from A to B, plus it is F F2 star of B, right? That's what it is. Just pay attention to this actually instead of the not notation. This should make it clear. So CAB we know is 2. What do we know F2 star of B? We know what F2 star of B here is, right? So when I put S is equal to B, I get 11. So this is going to be 11, which is going to be 13. What about F of A C? CAC plus F2 star of C, we know that F2 star of C is actually 7. Now what is CAC? CAC is 4 plus 7 is equal to 11. FAD similarly we can just write down is 3 plus let me just write down the equation as well. CAD plus F2 star of D, which is 3 plus 8 is equal to 11, right? It's 8, right? F2 star of D. So let's write that down. Okay, so A to B, this is going to get me 13, this is going to get me 11, this is going to get me 11, is C or D, and this is going to be 11. So what is your optimal total cost? So what we wanted, remember, was F1 star of A. That's what we wanted to solve right at the beginning. So if you go back, for example, we said that what we want to solve, remember, is we want to minimize x1 such that f1 of ax1, right? That's what we wanted to minimize, and that is essentially your f1 star of A, right? So, and that's what we have found by starting with the simplest subproblem and then increasing the size of the problem by 1, right? You use the optimal solution from the previous subproblem in your current subproblem, and proceeding in that way you solve the entire problem. So f1 star of A is 11. What is the optimal solution? Now what you can do is you go from the first solution to the last, right? So from A we know that we have to go to either C or D. So let's write down the optimal solution actually. So the optimal solution is from A you go to either C or D. From C there is only one path. If you go to C, you know there is only one path, right, which is E. That is your x2 star, that is the optimal decision here. But from D you know that you can go to either E or F. So from C you can only go to E, but from D you can either go to E or you can go to F. What about from E? From E it's straightforward. You have to go to, now from E you know that your optimal xn star is actually, what is it? It's H, and from F you know it is I. So your optimal solution from here is going to be H. From H here it's going to be I. From here of course it's only J. So you have three optimal solutions in this case, right? So which is basically A to C to E to H to J, A to D to E to H to J, and A to D to F to H to J. So you have three optimal solutions. Each of them will give you an F1 star of A is equal to 11. Okay, so the basic dynamic programming problem approach, once again, divide your problem into stages, define clearly what the states are at each stage, get the costs associated of making each decision at each state, right, at each stage, and then find the optimal policy. Now, why is this an optimal policy? The reason this is an optimal policy, we say that this is not an optimal solution but an optimal policy, is because it tells you at each stage what are the possibilities, what are the optimal possibilities, right? So if you are in, for example, in stage 3, right, if you're in stage 3 and you find yourself in, for example, in E, F or G, it tells you what is F star 3 of E. It gives you an optimal solution for wherever you are in the problem. So here it gives you, for example, an F3 star of F, and here it gives you an F3 star of G. So, and similarly in stage 2 you get a set of optimal solutions. So what I'm trying to say here is that what is the difference between optimal policy and optimal solution? A solution basically is one particular solution. It tells you do this, right, to solve this. An optimal policy tells you what to do when you are in a given situation actually. So this is the policy, this is the principle that I must adopt, right? So that is the that is one big difference of dynamic programming with other solution approaches in optimization in operations research. Okay, is that it gives you an optimal policy. All right. Similarly, as I said, in 2 it tells you if you're in B, C or in D, you know what to do. Let's say for whatever reason from A you did not actually go to C or to D, right? Instead you went off to B for some reason. Okay, but then what dynamic programming does is it tells you, okay, you found yourself at B, that's okay. We know how. Here's what you do from now on to ensure that you minimize cost, right? So that's what it does. So it says, okay, you find yourself at B, here's your F2 star of B, follow this and you know what to do. So from B you know that you have to go to, so for example from B you know that you have to go to E or F, you can go to E or F, and if you go to E you know that you're going to go to H, and if you're an F you know you're going to go to I, right? Okay, yeah. So this is the basic idea of dynamic programming. Okay, now I'm going to formally define what are the characteristics of a dynamic programming problem. Okay, so problem characteristics enabling a DP formulation. First, you need to be able to break problem into stages. Okay, in the Wagner-Witten case, you are able to break it down into different weeks. So there was a clearly defined. So all of this you have to do before you start solving the problem. Just keep in, and you define your objective functions and so on, right? Okay, and the recursion relationships and all that. So what I'm trying to say is you need to be able to clearly define your problem into stages before you formulate it as a what do you call it, before you actually start solving it. Okay, yeah, you need to be able to break the problem down into stages. You need to be able to clearly define states associated with each stage. Once again, the number of states can be infinite or finite, but you need to be able to define what are the states associated with each stage. You need to have a specification. Okay, third thing is, as we said, you have to make a policy decision at each stage. Remember, not at each state, but at each stage. So you need to define what are the possible options that are available to you at a given state in a stage. If you're in this state, you should be able to define what are the possible options that are available to you in a particular stage. So it's not necessary. In our case, in our problem we said that if you're for example in the second if you're for example in the second stage, right, you're in one of B, C or D, the possible options were the same in each of B, C and D. That's not necessarily the case. So for example, it could be, you could be in a situation where from B you could only go to C, you could only go to for example E or F, but from C you could go to either E, F or G, and from D maybe you could go only to G, for example. Okay, so that could be a possibility. So the idea is that you need to be able to define what are the possible decisions that are associated with each state in a given state. So you need to be able to provide what are the, you need to be able to specify what are the policy decisions possible at each stage. Okay, next. So what does a policy decision do? A policy decision actually it basically takes you from one state to another state. Okay, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, finally, I think the important thing to mention is this: two things, right? First thing is that, what did we see? We said that if you're in B, the optimal policy, the optimal policy for if you're in B, it really does not depend on how you got to B, right? So if you're in B, you know that okay, you have to either go to E or F, and then from E you have to go to H, and if you go to F, you need to go to I, and from there you go to J. So you really don't care about how you got to B, right? So the one key property is that optimal policy for a stage, and it is only because of this that we were able to use the optimal solution associated with us with the last stage, for example in the second last stage, in the second last stage with the third last stage, and so on, right? So the optimal policy for remaining stages is independent of how you got to that stage, or in other words, independent of policy decisions in previous stages. Okay, so this is important. So this is essentially what sort of property is this? This you should know. This is called as the Markovian property of a problem, or the memoryless property, right? So what we're saying is that the optimal policy for the remaining stages, it must be independent of how you got to that stage, or the policy decisions in the previous stages. So if you get to B, or if you get to, for example, E, the optimal policy of getting from E to J does not depend on how you got to E, right? So that's what we are trying to say here. Finally, the other thing to say is that you should be able to define a recursive relationship between policy decisions, a recursive relationship between optimal policy decisions for stages. You should be able to write down a recursive relationship between the policy decisions for the previous stages. In our specific problem, we wrote down Fn of Sxn is equal to C of Sxn plus Fn plus 1 star of Xn, right? So this is what we wrote down. Now every dynamic programming problem is going to have a slightly different recursive relationship, but in general we can say that you should be able to write down a general relationship of the form. So we can say we should be able to say Fn of Sxn, so hold on, is some function of Sxn. So let's actually just okay, yeah, we can say that it needs to be some function of, let's say, g of Sxn and Fn plus star of xn. Okay, so Fn of Sxn must be able to be written in this form. Okay, and what we want to solve at each stage, is we want to minimize xn such Fn of Sxn, which is equal to minimize xn g of Sxn f star n plus 1 xn. So this is the problem that you want to be able to solve in each stage. Okay, and you should be able to write down a relationship between Fn of Sxn and Fn star of n plus 1 xn. So it is the presence of Fn's f star n plus 1 of xn in this relationship that makes us a recursive relationship, and you should be able to write down a recursive relationship like this actually for your problem to be able to formulate it as a dynamic programming problem. Okay, all right, we're going to stop here. I'm going to end by saying a couple of things. Okay, uh, first, the first thing that I want to say is we're going to end with dynamic programming here, and the idea here is to not just sort of teach you dynamic programming, right? The idea is as a whole. So for that, you will actually have to see a lot more problems to really get a feel for what makes a dynamic programming, what 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 sort of problems can be formulated as dynamic programming problems. But I'm trying to just giving you, I'm just trying to give you a flavor. I'm going to solve by solving a specific case, by writing down some general properties, and by writing down a sort of a general formulation also for the recursive relationship, right? That you need to be able to solve at each stage. Okay, so the idea is to just give you an introduction. It's just a flavor of dynamic programming. Okay, this is something that you can use in many in sort of many cases, in many problems in industrial engineering, operations research, and so on. Finally, the other thing I want to say is at the end of the course is what have we tried to do here overall in the course. Remember, overall in the course, and I've talked about this repeatedly in class, in person, what we try to do is to actually talk about what are some of the key decisions that one has to make when running a manufacturing setup. We talked about figuring out how much to produce and when to produce, right? Given some demand. We talked about how to translate demand for one item into demand for other items. We talked about, then we actually zoomed in a little bit and we said, okay, you have to make something in a production line. What are the dynamics associated with that? So we did a lot of queuing theory there. Then we sort of zoomed out again and said, okay, given large scale demand, long-term demand over some time in aggregate planning, how do you make decisions about when to produce, and how much to produce, right? And we also included, for example, workforce decisions also there. Then we said, okay, let's say you're making something, how do you know it is of good quality? So in statistical quality control, we discussed some statistical tools that are available to actually monitor the quality of the products that are being produced by a process, right? And then we said, okay, let's say that you have a production line, or you have, for example, a machine, and let's say you have a bunch of jobs coming in. How do you decide what is the sequence of job? What is the sequence in which these jobs must be processed on that machine in scheduling? In a very brief introduction to scheduling. Okay, and then finally, we actually ended up by sort of talking about two tools that you need that are very commonly used actually in industrial engineering, operations research, especially in industrial engineering and manufacturing setups. The most important being simulation. That's why I actually spent 3 classes on that. So it's used extensively in actually analyzing simulation. So you should know you should know that these are the different types of simulation. This is what discrete event simulation is. This is how it is used to analyze operations, and you should know that that is a possibility. That is a possible tool to use when you're trying to analyze operations in a manufacturing setup. Okay. and then finally we ended up with dynamic programming. Okay, so this is the idea. So the overall idea is to give you a set of tools to figure out to make decisions uh, in a manufacturing setup. Now there are many things that we did not cover as part of this. Okay, and that's natural. So if this was an industrial engineering program as a whole, then you would take these in individual courses. But because this is sort of an introduction to industrial engineering, I can only cover these and at a somewhat superficial level, let's say. Okay, but I think queuing theory we've covered in a reasonable amount of depth. Inventory control we covered in a reasonable amount of depth. We covered MRP also actually reasonably well, and then we touched over a bunch of different topics such as aggregate planning, scheduling, statistical quality control, simulation, dynamic programming, and so on. Now, everything that we have done so far has been quite quantitative, right? So everything that we've seen has involved mathematical models, or of course in the case of simulation, an introduction to computational modeling of some process or some thing, right? It's been quantitative, it's been computational. So now I want you. There are some things that I would have liked, for example, Mr. Suresh Anand to come and cover as part of his lecture initially in our discussion, but that was not possible due to the pandemic. Those actually dealt more with actually. Uh, let's talk about those are manufacturing management philosophies, I would say actually. Okay, and these include topics such as lean manufacturing. It includes things like just-in-time or JIT. It includes things like Kaizen, Six Sigma, and so on. Okay. Now, these are things that, given his vast experience in implementing these in manufacturing setups, I would have liked for him to talk about. But as I said, we could not do it. That said, the specific reason why I did not cover them myself. Okay. The first reason is because these are sort of manufacturing management philosophies. A lot of this stuff it's not mathematically very involved. It's actually there's not much mathematics involved at all. Okay, and they're really a set of sort of best practices in some way. I would not even necessarily call them practices. These are practices that have evolved over time. Philosophies of how to actually what should be the focus of what should you focus on, minimizing waste, in ensuring that you have the right product at the right time or the right raw material at the right time. In the case of just-in-time, lean manufacturing is just about minimizing waste in every single way. Kaizen is about continuous improvement, for example, and Six Sigma is about reducing defects and so on. It's about increasing quality. So for the most part, none of these are mathematically involved. B, they are things that you can easily pick up by reading them. And D, you don't need me to explain it, right? So my expertise lies in sort of OR and in sort of mathematical and computational modeling. So it is better if these things are actually explained by somebody who has implemented them in practice. Okay, so I'm going to give and to just get an introduction to these things, you can just read a little bit about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload the slides that Mr. Suresh Anand would have actually used if he were teaching these topics on Moodle over the next day or two. He will be sending them to me very shortly. You can also read about these things actually in the textbook. In Faculty Physics actually does a wonderful job of treating these subjects. So does, for example, Operations Management by Russell and Taylor. So I would suggest that you read these things. Okay. Finally, I want to say that for dynamic programming, the textbook to use is Hillier and Lieberman. Okay, so HILLIER LIEBER. So this is ERMAN. Okay, Hillier and Lieberman, Operations Research. Just Google Operations Research Hillier and Lieberman. You should be able to find it without much trouble. Look at chapter 11. I think it's chapter 11. Okay, dynamic programming. But there's a dynamic programming chapter, and you can read that. I've used the exact same example in that here, so you should be able to follow it quite easily. Now, I do want to include dynamic programming in the exam, and I will be discussing with your convener, and I'll be getting back to you very shortly. Okay. All right. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this course. I hope you've learned something from this course. Unfortunately, we could not do this in person. You could not sort of benefit from the experience of Mr. Suresh Anand. These are strange times. So I had fun teaching the course as I always do. So I just hope that you have you had fun as well. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.